Welcome to The Law, Your Money, and You. I'm Roberta Saphire, an attorney in Massachusetts.
And I'm Camille, Barron, a financial coordinator, also in Massachusetts. And today we have a guest who's going to be talking with us about some landlord-tenant issues and also about that kind of phenomenon that a lot of us don't really understand too well, unclaimed property.
That's right. And we're very happy, and we'll start right away. Thank you, Mark Sandonato, and I know I said that right.
Of course, Marco, yes.
Yeah, Marco. Oh, I said Mark, huh? Well, okay, Marco. It's all from the same, derived from the same name,
Well,
isn't it,
go.
Marcus?
It's okay.
There you go. Okay. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Thank you
Glad
for
to be
joining
here.
us. And we always say, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Sure thing. Well, I'm right here from the Commonwealth. I was born in, the South Shore from Braintree, and went to school out here. I'm a product of the public schools, and went to Bridgewater State University, and went to New England School of Law, and worked at the Commonwealth's Treasury at the Unclaimed Property Division, and I was the Chief Compliance Officer over there, and I did a lot of auditing, auditing for unclaimed property, which is to say the companies that are supposed to give the state unclaimed property. I made sure that they actually gave it to us.
What do you mean the companies?
Well,
that
you know
are
what?
supposed-
You know how
yeah.
unclaimed property works? So companies and banks have a lot of property out there that belongs to individuals. So we call the companies holders. So it could be a payroll check. It could be people's last payroll check that was maybe mailed to an old address. They got returned in the mail. In the case of a bank, it could be a bank account that was closed.
Yeah. Most people hear about the bank accounts.
Sure.
That's what I've heard about.
Yep, so the way the bank accounts work is it's a bank account that you could have forgotten about. It's a bank account that you hadn't touched in 3 years. It's the magic number in Massachusetts is 3 years, okay? So if you haven't touched it in 3 years, what's supposed to happen is that bank is supposed to send the money that's left in that account to the Commonwealth's Treasury. So what happens is they'll send over, it's usually over $100 million every year, okay?
Boy.
That's not just banks, by the way, that's all sorts of companies.
How about storage places? Like people store furniture.
You're getting into a different type of property.
Oh, okay.
Okay. But what banks do as well, they send tangible properties that come in safe deposit boxes.
Oh.
So that falls under the sort of umbrella of what you're thinking about. But it's largely money. And just to stay on banks, for example, and that 3-year mark, they'll send over that. And then what the Commonwealth does is they'll publish those individuals' names in the newspaper. And this is something that a lot of people don't know. Once those names come out in the newspaper, people will say, gee, that list comes out. And people have this sort of vague knowledge about this list. And then they'll call and they'll say, okay, my name's John Smith. And they'll call the state to see if they're the actual John Smith that's listed in the paper. Everybody thinks they have a unique name. So my advice to those people is cut the Commonwealth some slack. They can tell if it's you or not.
How do they tell if it's say?
Well, here's the thing. When the bank reports the money, they'll report it with the address you used to have, as well as your social security number and the
okay.
account number.
Yeah.
So you'll have a lot of people with what they think is an uncommon name.
Yeah.
And they'll say, well, my name's, Bernard Foley, and I live on L Street in South Boston. Well, guess what? You're not the only Bernard Foley on L Street. But
Yeah.
Bernard Foley will invariably insist that he's the only one. And we'll say, okay, Mr. Foley, kindly provide us with the last 4 digits of your social security number. And he'll say, well, it's 4215 or what have you. And, the person at the division can say, no, it's not you. Give me your address or your past 2 addresses. Here they are. Okay, well, no, it's not you. And so that's how they can weed out whomever.
We did that once. It was in a joint trust with this other attorney that used to work for us. So we went up there, and we had a show. This is years ago.
Sure.
An
And you have to show
identification.
proof.
Yeah.
Roberta, you know what people don't know
What?
that I think would be helpful to your viewers? That list that comes out is only the most recent stuff that the Commonwealth gets.
Oh.
So what I would encourage people to do, and the state treasury, to their credit, has made a really valiant effort at reaching out to people. I would encourage people to call in on a regular basis. I'd say every 6 months or so, because money comes in constantly. Money from insurance companies and money from banks, because
Where is
they
it
report
held?
at a different.
Excuse me, where is it held?
In the state general fund.
Now, does that earn interest on
Yes,
it?
and the Commonwealth pays interest. They pay simple interest
Really?
at a statutory rate, and I think that rate's 5%.
Better than some investments.
Yeah.
Please, Madam Treasurer, don't hang me
Right.
on that one. I think it's a statutory rate of 5%.
How did you find yourself in that position?
I worked for the state treasury, and it's part of the state treasury. So I started at the retirement board, which is also part of it falls under the umbrella of the treasurer and receiver general.
Really?
So I was there for a year and a half, and then I moved down the hall to the unclaimed property division.
Fascinating.
Yeah, and there I learned a lot. And I stayed in the field of unclaimed property afterwards because I was there and I went to law school at the same time
Oh,
at
you
night.
were in law
And
school then.
what I would advise people is, if you want to do that, work full time and have a serious career in the daytime and go to law school at night. Don't plan on sleeping at all. It's not
That's
an
what
option.
I did.
Precisely. So you know, and but thereafter, after law school, I had
Boy, bless you.
I had the
Hard
law
worker.
degree as well as the experience. So what I did is I actually went into I was hired by a consulting firm on the West Coast to do audit defense. So I would defend those firms that I used to audit. It was much like being going from being a prosecutor to being a criminal defense attorney.
Yes.
But
So did you go out to the West Coast? or-
Yes, I did. I lived in Los Angeles or Pasadena, and I worked in downtown LA, and I worked for some of the largest corporations in the world defending unclaimed property audits.
Now, do these
amazing, huh?
corporations that have this unclaimed property, you mentioned that they list in the newspaper? The banks list
The state will list it in the newspaper.
they must make quite an effort to contact the individuals, obviously.
Yes.
And they may not be able to for some reason. Maybe they've moved.
Well, the
whatever.
state does more than that, to tell you the truth. They do more than just publish it in the newspapers. They send notices to last known addresses,
Really?
or at least they did. Yeah,
Oh, that's interesting.
I think we did that before. I'm going to say this with the caveat that the last I worked there was, I want to say, 2004. I have stayed, again, as I indicated, I've stayed abreast of a lot of things that go on in unclaimed property because I've been involved kind of in the fringe in the course of my practice and the course of consulting. But, in terms of the internal workings of how our particular Commonwealth's Treasury works, I'm not sure of, their sort of internal stuff as much as I used to be. But they do
This is
make
so
quite an
great.
effort.
Do you know how many people know nothing about it and they just let it sit there
I know
even after you
absolutely
tell
how many
them?
people know nothing about it.
What about Rhode Island? Do they have something like that? She used to
Yeah,
live
but
in
they're
Rhode
not.
Island.
Honestly, there's not a lot of states that do it as. And I'm going to throw a shout out to the treasurer and the whole Treasury Department right now. There's not a lot of states that do it quite as well as we do. I'll just be
Yeah.
very honest with you.
Our state too, because we got to get to our other topic.
Sure.
But our state treasurer's office too, as people know, we're into financial literacy a lot, bringing it out because that's our future, the financial literacy and the children with their career choices, because when I say they're our future, they're the ones that are going to make our country great. Is the students and everything.
Sure.
And this treasurer now is doing more with financial literacy.
Yeah, I mean, and it's been a theme with the Treasurer's Office over the years. I remember a program once upon a time was called Savings Makes Sense.
That's a good one.
That was
Yeah.
under Treasurer Joe Malone. I know that
I like that. Savings makes sense.
Treasurer Shannon O'Brien used to have a program for women, financial literacy for women. It was something
Really?
specific to, yeah. And so that was, that was just another example of how the Treasury's really worked on things like financial literacy.
Well, your alma mater, Bridgewater State, now has, as of this year, a new financial.
It's called the
What's
Center
it
for
called?
Financial Literacy Initiatives. It's headed up by
Dr. Margaret.
Dr. Margaret Brooks.
Brooks,
She was an
who's been on the
economics
show.
professor for 30 years at Bridgewater
Yeah.
State. And this started up about in November of last year. So that
Yeah.
was November of 2015. But the whole idea is to bring financial
So-
awareness not only to the school and the teachers,
Has
but
she been there for 30 years?
yes.
Yeah, she
I don't know
said
that I had her. I'm dating myself now because I'm 43.
Oh,
I
you're
graduated
old.
there. Now, you be
You
gentle
look
on me
younger.
now.
You look younger.
Thank you. You just became my
No,
favorite
you-
person now.
Yes, I was before we met.
Well,
But there's another fellow too that the state is doing, Scott Gild. Even though it's spelled G-U-I-L-D, he pronounces it Gild, so we pronounce it Gild. He's the head of the Economic Development Commission. And then these programs, Jumpstart, he heads that one in Massachusetts.
I'm not familiar with it.
Yeah, that's a whole new thing. But anyway, I want to talk about what you are familiar with.
Sure.
And what you do on a day-to-day basis, I assume, the landlord tenant eviction, because you're
Sure.
not doing the unclaimed property anymore. But if anybody has any questions on unclaimed property,
Feel
they
free.
should,
Sure.
because I've gone after the unclaimed property, and I have told other people about it whose names I've seen, and they go, oh, well, I don't know.
They should call anyway. Yeah.
They just don't seem to
and-
want to do it.
And even though you're switching topics, Roberta, if I might, before you switch, I would encourage people, even if they don't see their names in the paper, to call anyway, because they can't publish everyone.
Fascinating. You
Yeah.
better have Jim call right away.
Yeah, actually, my husband actually did get something, and I think it turned out that it was his late aunt's. I think it might be either his mother or his late aunt, both of whom are deceased, some sort of a stock certificate from many, many years ago.
Oh, so they have that too then?
Yeah.
Stock
It's a
certificate.
stock certificate.
Yeah.
They might not have even known they had it.
There's a number of those stories. Yeah, we have a whole bunch of them.
Yeah.
Sure.
So one of the first questions people have, and we did an episode on Landlord Tenant, but we get it mostly to college students, because there are landlords who want to hold back security deposits.
Sure.
So we were talking about that. But basically now, the laws are like changing. Everybody
Yeah.
thinks they're all for the tenant, the deadbeat who doesn't want to have to pay, or the deadbeat landlord who doesn't want to take care of his property. But why don't you give us a scenario where the two scenarios: the tenant's a good guy, and then one where the landlord's a good guy,
Okay. Well,
and the landlord wants to get the tenant out.
so I'll give you. Yeah. Well, okay. Let's talk about the tenant as the good person.
Okay.
So I generally don't represent tenants for purely economic reasons. Okay. I'm sorry. Sometimes tenants just can't pay. Often, well, it is what it is.
Well, forget
It's a-
about the money.
No.
Just he's a
But
good
and
tenant.
I'll give you the
Okay.
exact scenario. Okay. I will, however, on security deposit issues because that's when the landlords go astray. But I'm going to give you the good tenant, bad landlord issue. Okay. So you have the tenant in an area where it's a high yield rental area, which is to say the property is very inexpensive. Okay. So take a lot of and I don't mean this as a knock to the community, but where the Northeast Housing Court is, you take a lot of your marginal areas and I love the buildings out there, they're beautiful, but the rents, say like your Lynn, your Lowell, Methuen, what have you, okay? So what you have is you have a lot of landlords who go in there and they buy inexpensive property. And what they're not willing to do is throw money into repairs, okay? Some of the buildings are just flatly illegal, okay? Filled with code violations. Now you have a tenant who's paying. They're doing what they're supposed to do per the contract, per the lease, which is the contract. They're paying every month. Landlord not doing a thing, okay? Sometimes they will forbear from paying rent. They'll repair and deduct, as is their right, if something is broken. And landlord will try to evict, or they'll, or tenant, better still, tenant will call the Board of Health if it's, if there's a Board of Health issue. Landlord will evict. Now, the Commonwealth of Massachusetts makes that if the landlord sends a notice to quit within 6 months of the tenant calling the Board of Health, the state of Massachusetts makes the automatic presumption that they're doing that in retaliation. And they could award the tenant 6 months of possession
Boy,
in that
free
apartment.
rent. But don't you have the tenants who throw rubbish around themselves? I'm saying now the bad tenant.
Roberta, weren't you just asking about a good tenant? I'm trying to keep you honest now.
I've switched it.
Now you're switching hats over. You're trying to confuse me. It's a good thing it's not early in the morning.
Good tenant, bad tenant. Maybe they're one and the same sometimes.
So listen, so that's
Yeah.
the good, but
That's the
really
good
that's
tenant.
the good tenant scenario where you're going to, and we can jump there. And
Okay,
that's
the
fine.
bad tenant, and
Yeah.
this is years ago, my brother ran into this.
Sure.
The bad tenant, you got a landlord who wants to fix up, and so the bad tenant figures, well, gee, they'll fix up, they'll raise our rent. And so they throw the trash out the window and call the Board of Health.
Yeah, well, listen, the reality out there is that the tenant laws in Massachusetts favor the tenant, for sure, okay? And it's not even close. And it's readily available. The information's readily available. I had indicated earlier, I mean, I bought my first rental property before I bought my first drink. It was a long, long time ago.
Do you still have
And the
it?
interesting thing, I actually, as my practice was growing, I sold them off because I just couldn't
Yeah, it's
handle.
hard to handle.
But whatever
yeah.
the case was, but the interesting thing is, there's there's so much information available to tenants out there now, so that if a tenant really wants to, let's talk about that bad tenant, okay? So if a bad tenant really wants to, I'll say like it is, extort their landlord, or really
Give them a hard time.
give them a hard time, or even try to seek sort of retribution or impose sort of financial damage on them. The information is out there on precisely how to do it.
Yeah, they have a lot of legal aid too today for people who.
Yeah, and it's extortion. You know what? I'll tell you something interesting. There's a lot of people like me, a lot of landlord-tenant attorneys, who simply won't represent a lot of tenants anymore, because there's the consumer protection statute out there, which is, and I know you're a landlord, 93A, correct? Yep.
Yeah, it was here. Yeah.
Yep. And so for your viewers, if they haven't heard of it, it's a consumer protection statute that landlords fall under. And if a
Did
landlord...
they always fall under that, the 93A? Or
No,
is that
not in the beginning. It
recent?
was, no. It's not recent.
Oh.
So whatever the case is, no, I didn't mean for that to sound quite so snappy.
Oh, that's
But
okay.
but whatever the case is, it can award treble damages plus attorney's fees. Okay, so what happens to a lot of people, to a lot of landlords, is that they'll cave, even under charges that might be false,
Because they don't want to.
because they don't want it, because just fighting it might just be too expensive. And that's the reality.
Well,
that's
what
the paradigm.
would you say is the best course? Because we're approaching. You've got to be kidding. Believe it or not, I mean the time is just flying.
Because we're having fun,
Yeah.
Roberta, and that's how it works, right?
Well, you're in a nice community now, Braintree. That's kind of
I've
like
always liked
have
Braintree.
yeah,
I've always liked Braintree, sure.
02184. I'm on zip codes. But what is the best course of action for a landlord who wants to get rid of his tenant, who's really a pain in the neck, but doesn't want to go through any nightmares? And you know,
it's a simple answer. Work out. I'll be very honest with you. Work out an arrangement. Work out an agreement. When you go into court, all the judges want you to prefer that you have an agreement that you can present to them, that they can swear off on, that they can just say, you know, have you read it? Yes, I've read it. Have you read it? Yes, I've read it, and boom.
I think what they worry about, a lot of the landlords, is that they'll lose the rent. The tenant will see that they want them out and say, well, it's going to take you a few months, you know, to get me out. I'm not going to pay the rent.
In most cases, the loss of rent is a foregone conclusion, to be honest. Okay. You know, so that's the reality in a lot of cases. If they're so far behind in rent, where the rent is a foregone conclusion and it's just getting possession back, I'll talk to people that I'm evicting, and honestly, I want to work with them.
Yeah,
so
you're better off
I'll always
doing
say, call me. And I'll say, listen, because you know what? It's interesting. Tenants are always very afraid when they go to court. But I say, everything in the courtroom is designed to help you, believe it or not. And I'm happy that even though I'm evicting them, they feel better when they get off the phone with me. Because I said, once we get into that courtroom, I'm going to work with you to have an arrangement to get, you know, so that you're going to leave. I'm going to win eventually.
Oh, yeah.
But you're going to go, maybe we're going to make an arrangement where you're going to leave on terms that we both agree to.
What's the shortest you've got them out, and what's the
10
longest
days.
you've got them out? Really? 10 days after you've given them a notice, or you
Oh, no. Not 10 days after you give them a notice. Like sometimes after you take them to court, the judge says, I'll take it under advisement, and then 10 days later, you know.
Have you ever had any that hang on forever?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Because the housing laws are so persnickety, I had this lawyer who had been practicing for forever and a day. And he had, and the tenant, they were elderly, and they had, there were so many specific things where it was difficult to move them. And he turned a simple eviction into, he filed like 4 or 5 motions.
Oh, yeah, they filed their
We
own
had to go into,
forms. Yeah.
and this thing took about, going back to court like 8 months later.
Oh, my God.
And I finally was just like, let's go in the hallway. Let's just work, let's work out something. And we finally were able to we worked some circumstances to our arrangement, but to our agreement. But
I'm sorry to interrupt,
not at all.
that's my nature. But what's good about this is he's showing the real part of it, not just, well, you say this is the law here, and this is the law here. I mean, this is what actually happens. You don't get them out right away. You have to try to work with them. I mean, that's so interesting. You brought the human nature into it.
You have to, because listen, at the end of the day, what you're doing is, think about it, you're uprooting someone from their life, right?
Exactly.
Because you're telling someone, okay, you're sending them a letter essentially saying you're not going to have a home in 45 days or, at the end of next month. And you're expecting them to just sort of get up and leave?
Yeah, they don't care about their credit either, some of them.
Yeah, that's
probably don't even think about that.
No.
Well, sometimes that's kind of the thing I try to say to people. I say, listen, I'll work with you to avoid that eventuality. And that's what I always say to them. And I don't mean to be cocky. I'm just a realist. I say, it's going to happen eventually. I'm going to win eventually. So why don't, let's work out a situation that works for everybody. And, if it doesn't go to that final stage, it ends up saving my client's time and money and whatever, and everybody's happy.
Years ago, we had this client, many years ago, and he bought a house, or he evicted the people, whatever it was. So he said to the people, this is the realistic approach. I've never heard of anybody else doing it. He said to them, look, you can stay here, but I can tell you Monday morning, see this fellow here? Him and all his relatives, and they were a different color, are going to be here Monday and move in with you.
You're going to be kidding.
No, it's true. It was funny. And the people got out. They saw the other people showed up Monday morning, and the other people couldn't get out fast enough.
Well, that's one way to get arrested now. That's one way for that to happen.
But we're going into our You've Got to Be Kidding. Fascinating. And before we sat down, you told me a You've Got to Be Kidding one. That
Actually happened at the...
We're really going to say You've Got to Be Kidding.
Well, you know what? This actually happened at the Unclaimed Property Division. It didn't happen to me. What the Unclaimed Property Division does, and we had touched on it ever so briefly when you had brought it up. So they do tangible property auctions from things that come out of safe deposit boxes. So I was paneling with a colleague who was a private consultant at one of the big 4 consulting firms.
Fascinating.
And we were taking questions from the audience. And one of the people in the audience said to her, and she was a former deputy treasurer in charge of unclaimed property, said, "What's the strangest thing?" And I had been working at the division at the time. And they said to her, "What is the strangest thing you've ever seen in a safety deposit box?" And I said, "Well, we've had gold bars, and we've had, and I'm saying sort of run-of-the-mill stuff." And then they looked at her, and then she said, "A human finger."
Oh my God, You've got to be kidding.
I looked at her and I said, "You've got to be kidding me." and that was that. I mean, I had been there and I didn't even know about that.
Oh my goodness.
What did they do with it?
I have no idea.
I wonder if there was a ring on the
Maybe
finger.
the ring was on it, and they could. I'll chop your finger off if you don't give me that ring back.
I have no idea. I suspect it became evidence for some. I have no idea. I wouldn't presume to know.
Can you imagine opening it up and going, "Oh my God"?
At least it wasn't a head or a human hand.
They probably had.
I hope I don't get a
those,
call
too.
from the Attorney General in a week or so. I'm just going to profess that I know nothing.
Well, I have this is also a true story, getting back to the Landlord Tennant. Well, you and I both went to school in Boston, and there are certain parts of Boston that have, they're in Back Bay, and there's problems with rats and so forth. So this tenant was living on the basement level of the apartment right around that area. And there'd been some evidence of rats, they could hear them in the walls. And when they talked to the superintendent, "Oh, no, there's no rats here, we took care of it, Anything that you're seeing, like dirt, that's because of the hippies who used to live here." So this was back a few years. So anyway, when the time came that this individual is moving out of the apartment, opens up the closet, and there's a rat in the closet. And he took a broom and started doing this, and the rat's running around and around, and finally got the rat, okay? And the rat was dead. I know it sounds great, but, and he took that and went and stood it up in front of the superintendent's apartment, and then left.
Are you kidding? We have to wrap up the show with that.
And that truly is a story. It is real.
Good. Well, thank you.
Oh, thank you for having me.
We
It
have
was
to
wonderful.
wrap up the show, believe it or not, real fast.
Yeah,
now.
so to our viewers, thank you for tuning in.
Yeah.
And
Good.
listen, if you get any of those
Marco.
notifications or you see it in the paper about unclaimed property and you want to know what to do, send us an email and we'll make sure that we'll forward it on to Marco, who might be able to advise you. And again, Landlord Tenant, if there are any problems and you're not sure how
Love
to
to
handle
have
it,
you back.
we'll have you back.
Oh, anytime.
Please
Find
let
us
us
some
know
other
if
stuff.
there's any information you like, because we really rely on our viewers to help us with topics. We like to know what you're thinking, what your feedback is. So please let us hear from you, because remember, this is your show, the law, your money,
And you.